Hi everyone. Let me give you the date. It's the 10th of November, 19th of Mar Cheshvan. A couple things before we begin. Some of you or two of you wrote to me about rakia. We spoke a little bit about rakia, and I don't want to get into that again, but I'll just, it's in the Siddur as well. Um, in Shabbos morning, what do we say in Akol Yoducha? It says, "Ha'el haposech b'chol yom dalsos shari mizrach uvokia chalone rakia motzi chama mimkoma levana mimchon shivta." Translation here from the Sack Siddur. God who daily opens the doors of the gates of the east and cleaves the windows of the sky and brings out the sun from its place and the moon from its abode. Now, this could all be poetic way of speaking about the sun coming out, etc. But I found a long time ago that in Yosef Shlomo Del Medigo, the famous Yashar of Kandia, in his Sefer Mayan Chatum, it's part of the book Elim. If you look on page 77, he says as follows. He quotes this passage and he says, Uvokea chalone rakia hu kefi machshava shehuskara batalmud ve'en litmoa im hayu noti min ha'emet bidvarim kinyanim she'ena meiskam ve'umatam. He says this is based on how the Talmud viewed like the heavens, and you shouldn't be surprised, or shouldn't be be surprised if they diverge from the truth. He's saying the truth as we know it. He's in the 1600s. He's an astronomer also. He was Tycho Brahe. He was a student of his. And why not? Because the Talmud, he says about the Talmud and scientific matters, the she'ena iskam ve'umnotam ve'ena mekubalim etzlam. This is not what they're focused on. It's not their specialty, and they didn't receive it from a tradition. Where they got it from? They got it from Hayavanim, and the Yavanim were the ones who made the mistake on this. So, but it's in our siddur. So, I mean, he's not saying to change it. You can interpret it more symbolically, but at least the Yashar Mikandia says that this prayer, which goes back to Talmudic times, uh, that's what it's based on. One of you raised a question. The question was, this is Eitan, that you found it strange the way I spoke about Musar TV and Rav Kook, because I described it as arising, at least in the Jewish community, from people with a grow up in a Jewish community, and then the Musar TV comes out. And you said that seems to go against the idea. I'm going to sneeze. I've been sneezing all day today. Okay, it's coming back. It'll come back. Okay. Uh, He says that seems to go against the idea of Musar TV, because if Musar is natural, sorry, if it should not need to come from a Torah community. It should come from a naturally developed human society. What I believe, and I think it's clear from Rav Kook the way I see it, is that yes, there's things that are natural, but uh, Jewish society, he speaks about the fact that Musar TV isn't just natural. It comes out of it's a revelation. So one who's more connected to a Jewish community is going to sense things naturally more. Obviously, I don't say that Jews have a monopoly on natural morality, but even the non-Jews, non-Jews also studied, as Herb pointed out in Rav Kook's letters, volume 1, page 52. He speaks about non-Jews studying the Bible. So these things, it isn't just because you study a book, it doesn't mean that it comes out of the book. Rav Kook speaks about intuition. And that's how I think you have to understand it. Now, Eitan, you cite a few passages in Orot Torah, but those passages actually support the way what I'm saying. So I don't need the other people don't have the text here in front of them. I, I'll write to you privately and explain to you why these passages in Orot Torah actually speak about how yes, there's a natural morality, but at the base of it all is the Torah. And when people feel the natural morality, it isn't just coming, like as a secular philosopher would say, it's just coming from how they reason leads them to somewhere. No, it's actually arising out of Torah. It's natural though because it's not coming from texts. It's coming from an intuition, conscience, etc. So I'll get back to you on this, Eitan. Hold on. Unless you're live with us, Eitan, in which case I'll still get back to you. You said you'd be in America this week. Okay, before we go further, I want to cite a few more passages after we saw everything Rav Kook said. Great stuff. And some of you, I think, were with us last night at the Chabura in New York. So we discussed a lot of these issues as well. But I want to read you a few more passages from Rav Amital and then a couple other things before we move further. This chapter we're on, it'll take us 2 weeks. Listen to this from this book, Olam Yehi Adam. This is from page 33. Rav Amital says that in Eastern Europe, there was a popular saying. What do we say? We say, Olam Yehi Adam Yirei Shamayim. We say that it's from davening. Every olam yehadam yirei shamayim. So the pshat is everyone should be. You should always be yirei shamayim, fear heaven, pious. But what did they say? How they read this in Eastern Europe? Not la'olam yehadam yirei shamayim. They read it as la'olam yehei adam. First, be a man. Va'achar kach yirei shamayim. La'olam yehei adam kama, and then yirei shamayim. Klomar, he says, ha'noshiyut ba'a od lifnei Torah. Humanity, menschlichkeit, comes before the Torah. HaTorah ma'amika machzekadotah. The Torah strengthens it. Aval nushiyot hima shenidrash me'adam od lifnei shegiel Torah. But first you have to be a mensch. And what does it mean to be a mensch? Again, this is, you can't even start studying Torah unless you're a mensch. But what he means by mensch is you, people who have an understanding. Granted, you could read it maybe the way you're reading it, Eitan, just general basic understandings of morality, but I think it's this intuition I'm talking about that you gather by osmosis. Let me read you another passage, 258, 259. Well, wait at the end. We'll get to questions and comments. I don't want to interrupt in the middle. To the Erev Pesach, the first Erev Pesach after the 6 Day War, Rav Amital says he came to the Kotel and he saw a Jew there that he knew, and he was all flustered. And he said, like, "Foo, you rabbis." So he said, "Well, why are you so upset with the rabbis?" And he said, "Why don't you let us go up to Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount?" And Rav Amital said that I was so, got so emotional from this Jew that within him was so strong this idea that he basically was saying, "Forget about you rabbis, I said to Rav Amital says, I said to him, I love you." And he says, on the way back, I met a Talmud Chacham from my family, and I told him this story. And the man said, "I don't understand." And he said, "There's a dispute between the Rambam and the Ravad if you go to Har HaBayit. So obviously we're not going to take a chance on this, so we're not going to go." Rav Amital says, I said to him, "This Jew, he doesn't know the Rambam and the Ravad have machokas on this, but it troubles him. It burns inside him that he can't go up. You, kvar lo boer, it doesn't burn inside you because you already learned it's a machokas of the Rambam and the Ravad." Then Rav Amital says, "Yesh mashu b'anashim pshutim." There is something special about simple Jews, shebederach klal lo motzim b'intelligentsia hagavoa, which you do not find among the intelligentsia. So Rav Amital is really channeling here Rav Kook, this idea of amcha, that the simple people, the Talmud Chacham doesn't feel that he has to go to Har HaBayit because he knows it's a machokes. Chances, who do we paskin by? But the simple Jew, he feels it. But it's not like gnai. It's not a negative thing, as maybe the Litvish Rosh Yeshiva would say, that it's amaratzos. That's why he feels this way. No, Rav Amital says it's l'shvach, because that's the primal Jewish sense that he wants to connect to Har HaBayis, even if halachically he's not allowed to. And Rav Soloveitchik, I was surprised to find that Rav Soloveitchik goes back and forth between the heights of intellectualism and then the simplicity. Simple faith, almost like a child. I found something very interesting from Rav Soloveitchik. And you can find it in this book, Rabbi Shlomo Pick. I don't know if people know who Rabbi Shlomo Pick is. He's from YU Musmach, student of the Rav. He wrote this book called Moadei Harav, which takes many of the shiurim of Soloveitchik on the festivals and explains them. He's from West Hartford, Connecticut. Then he was one of the people who ran the Bar Ilan Kollel for many years. Lives in Bnei Brak. Is in the minion of was in the minion of Saraya Deblitsky. But the Rav says as follows: the Rav has a shiur on Sukkah. And unfortunately, when they published the Rishimos Shiurim, they took out the Agadic section, but you can listen to it online, and he records it. And Rabbi Pick calls the Rav deals with. Hold on a second. The Rav deals with this passage that in Sukkah. Where is it? Yeah, so it talks about the arava and how you the mitzvah of arava, um, and you put the arava on the base on the mizbeach, the whole thing. I don't need to go into the thing there. So the Rav says, why the arava? Why not the lulav? Why not the esrog? And look what the Rav says. He says the Rav that starts speaking about the gowns of the Kohen Gadol and the regular Kohanim, and he said that the avnate, the I guess that's the belt, the sash that the Kohen Gadol wore is the only garb that was also worn by a regular Kohen. And he says this belt represents Emunah. Uh, it represents Avat Yisrael, Yirat Shamayim. He says that the Kohen Gadol was different than the regular Kohen, just like Gedolei Yisrael are different than the Amei Aretz. But when it comes to Emunah, Mesiras Nefesh, Al Kiddush Hashem, they were equal. V'yitachein, it's possible Sha'am Aretz Huaf Yoter Gadol. It's possible that the Am Aretz even has more Emunah or more Mesiras Nefesh than a Talmud Chacham. And the Rav says the Arava symbolizes Hayehudi Hapashut, Am Aretz. It symbolizes the simple Jew, Aval be'emunah shalo, but in his emunah and in his willingness to sacrifice himself al mizbach kiddush Hashem, it's worthy that the arava be placed on the mizbeach. So here you see Rabbi Soloveitchik also pointing to the simple people. I'll just give you two other passages that relate to this, just so you don't think that Rabbi Rav Kook is totally unique in this. I mentioned last class Rabbi Koppel Schwartz. Show you a picture of the great Rav Koppel again with yours truly at the wedding of one of the people who listens to our. One of the good things about these classes is I've met a lot of people online and in person, and I get invited to simchas. So this was a simcha of one of the children of one of our listeners, and actually Rabbi Kelman met that person as well. So that's Rabbi Koppel Schwartz, author of many, many Sfarim, probably the greatest expert in the Ramban Nachmanides um, in the country. He's published editions of the Ramban. Um, every year they have a Malava Malka at his shul in Borough Park, and they put out a volume. It's called Likutei Diburim. And in volume 10, and this year I was fortunate. They sent it to me, and Rabbi Koppel signed it himself to me and inscribed it. So it's a very nice inscription. But if you look in this Sefer on pages 43 and 44, he deals with natural morality, and he deals with something interesting that the Shulchan Aruch says that even if your father is a Russia, you're supposed to respect him. And Ramosha Isserles says, no. He says, Yesh Omrim, there's an opinion that you don't respect him. And he discusses this issue. And then he says that Kibud Av Va'em, respecting your father and mother, that's not one of the Shem Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. And nevertheless, we see that honorable non-Jews, Anshe Musar, he calls them, of non-Jews, always respected their parents. He relates it because before he was speaking about something, but they always respected their parents. Uke'ilu nitztavuo, as if they were commanded. And he says that this musar, to respect your parents, didn't come to them from the Torah. It's not part of the Shev Mitzvah B'nai Noach. Where does it come from? It comes internally. It's the natural morality. And then he says, this is interesting. He says, and they would respect every father, even if their father's a Russia. And that's the natural morality, to respect a father no matter how much of an evil person he is. Then he says, only after Matan Torah, when you have this idea of Oseh Maaseh Amecha, that someone who doesn't follow the way they're supposed to, he's considered Russia. Only then can you even have a Hava Mina, like the Ramah says, that you're not supposed to respect an evil father. But Benos Lavan, that's who he's talking about. They're before Matan Torah and they're not Jewish, so they have to respect the father even if he's a Russia. So Rabbi Koppel gives an example. He's saying that the Ramah, the way he learns the Sugya, is giving an exception to natural morality. That here's an exception that you only get through the halacha because of Matan Torah, that occasionally natural morality could be overridden. It would be curious to know what Rav Kook would say about this, because as we saw, he doesn't think that natural morality can be overridden. So he might, but the Ramah says Yesh Omrim. Do we paskin by Yesh Omrim? It's a question. You have to go to the Sifrei Klolim. Do we paskin by Yesh Omrim? The Shulchan Aruch doesn't hold this. But I find it fascinating. And if Koppel says something which is so basic, respect your father and mother, and it's not one of the Shem Mitzvahs B'nai Noach because it doesn't need to be one of the Shem Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. It's a Musar TV. Um, and finally, oh, two more things, and then we move on. I found something very also related to this from Rabbi Mazuz in his book Cheder Horati, Volume 4, pages 145, 146. He calls attention to this pasuk in Shoftim, chapter 13. If you remember the story with Manoach and his wife, so in verse 6, it says, the woman came and told her husband, a man of God came to me, his countenance like the countenance of an angel of God. So she recognized that he was not just a normal figure, he was angelic. Okay, and a few verses later, it says Manoach arose and he came to the man and said, "Are you the man that spoken to his wife?" And he said, "I am." Manoach couldn't see what his wife saw. His wife could see it. He couldn't. And Ramazuz explains that this is an example of what they call the bina of women. But what is it that okay, you might not like how he says that men learn Gemara, and that's what they do. But women, they have this like natural sense that it's intuitive to them, so they can see. That's how he explains when it says women have bina. So they're given this natural sense. But again, it's natural. It's like it's TV that they can sense things. And finally, um, we spoke last class about, and this is how we ended really, about issues of morality and um, slavery, things like that. I want to share with you what appears in this book, the conversations of Rav Sabato and Rav Lichtenstein. Rav Sabato from Ma'ale Adumim, the great novelist and thinker, and Rabbi Lichtenstein. And on pages it's in Hebrew also, on pages 78 and on, no, Rabbi Sabato, when speaking about morality, he raises the issue of slavery. There's other issues. We're going to speak about war, other issues as well, but slavery, it's front and center because it's in the Torah, it's in the Gemara, it's in the Rambam, and yet today we don't believe in the concept of owning someone. So he asks Rabbi Lichtenstein, how do you, today, in light of values that are universally accepted in the civilized world, we recoil from the whole notion of slavery? Is it legitimate for us to say such a thing? And how can we explain this development in the world? Does it testify to an ethical advancement from the days of the Bible, or is it a mere change in conditions? So he's pressing Rav Lichtenstein. The fact that we would never dream and we see it as immoral, does this mean that we're more ethically advanced than the previous generations, which that would create its own problems because aren't the generations supposed to decline? Or is it just a circumstance? Now, Rav Lichtenstein, he, I have to say, he doesn't satisfy me. He well, first he says that, studying the laws of slavery is fascinating. You could sit there and shiurim after shiurim talking about a slave, a half slave, and all these laws, but you don't even think about the fact that, wait a second, I mean, isn't this immoral to own someone? How can we even be talking about it? He says, because in Torah, it's in a theoretical thing you're removing. He says, when I study this topic, I do not say, just a moment, what am I doing? Why am I analyzing these details concerning slavery? I have absolutely no desire for this practice to be restored. He says that when we study it, we set aside our moral and ethical feelings. Okay, fine. The most he will say is that at one time, this is a quote, at one time the phenomenon of servitude was widespread and appropriate. Okay, and halacha crafted it in the most humanitarian way possible. And he says we have no interest in bringing it back. Okay, so what does that mean? Does that, Sabato says, have we progressed ethically since the days of the Bible with regard to slavery? And Rivaro, he says, I'm not going to sit in judgment before our forefathers. Uh, I'm not going to even ask the question or raise the issue of how could they have slaves? We do not. And it's not just that we don't have slaves. He says, we don't want there to be such a world. He says, I'm not going to judge my forefathers ethically. Um, and fine, we can all agree with this. We're not going to judge them a different world. But he doesn't go the next step that maybe it's possible that through the divine providence, we see things that previous generations don't see, that we stand on them, but the divine providence has opened up certain insights that earlier generations didn't. Rav Aaron won't go there. He keeps saying, I'm not prepared to cast aspersions on earlier Torah leaders. It's not a question of casting aspersions. I'm not casting aspersions on George Washington if I say that he had slaves in his era. This was acceptable. It's just that God has given us something that we sense things others don't. He says, I'm not going to see us as more sensitive than or more moral than our forefathers. I would not say more moral either, because every generation is different, but we are more sensitive to these things. I don't see how you can deny it. And Rabbi Sabato challenges this. He says, why don't we say that the world has indeed improved? Rav Kook develops an extensive thesis regarding the improvement of the world. And you see here, Rav Sabato was trying to push Rav Kook's approach that society advances with regard to ethics, and it's a realization of the will of the Torah that we should develop ethically. But Rav Aaron, who of course senses that this can open a Pandora's box, he refuses to go there. All he is willing to acknowledge is that in our circumstances today, it doesn't work, and we would never want it. But it doesn't mean that we have any more insight than previous generations. But Rav Sabato doesn't seem to have a problem with that, because that's what Rav Kook speaks about, that the world improves. Now, granted, it does raise Rav Kook's position, needs to be worked out, as I tried to do in the book, because it would, in the face of it, seem to challenge certain basic principles we have about the greats of the previous years, how Jewish law is dependent on them, and we learn everything from them. But that's what we're going to get into. Uh, Now let us move into a different area here in this chapter. Um, I'm picking up on like 104 and on. Rav Kook says, what happens therefore if you come across something in Jewish law from the sages, let's say, or even made from the Torah, which it doesn't work in people's minds today? Are we just stuck with it or not? And Rav Kook says that basically he says if, and you need a Sanhedrin for all this, but if a particular moral intuition, which will be determined to reflect the divine will, achieves widespread popularity, it's going to be the job of the Sanhedrin, Rav Kook says, to look into matters to see, is this law designed to be internal, or can we update? I guess that's the best way to put it. Because now you might say, well, this sounds like conservative or Reform Judaism, but not really. Because look in the Rambam Hilchos Mamrim. The Sanhedrin has the authority to create drashot and change the understanding of the law. And if it's done through a drasha, it doesn't need to be greater than the previous generations. Rav Kook sees the Sanhedrin as able to take into account new moral and religious insights. He says it explicitly. If a question arises about some law, which ethical notions indicate should be understood in a different way, then if the Sanhedrin decides that it only pertains to circumstances that no longer exist, they will find a source for this in the Torah. That is, it can't just be any individual deciding, well, this is no longer binding. It has to be the Sanhedrin. That's the check to make sure that people are not just being led astray by Western values or anything like that. But the Sanhedrin is able to understand the essence of the Torah, and that there's multiple levels in the Torah, and that maybe, let's say, Sanhedrin could ban slavery, could say we can't do this anymore. No, the Torah speaks about it. Fine, but the Torah is speaking about it. The Sanhedrin can understand that the Torah is speaking about it for one era, one generation. We are now in a different generation, and they can even come up with a drasha. Now, they don't just make up the drasha. The drasha is derived by them from the Torah, and they have that authority to make that now it's forbidden. That's the job of the Sanhedrin. And you're going to say, well, wait a second. So just because people, even if the whole Jewish community feels a certain way, including the rabbis, how then can you create a drasha to change the way we practice? But the answer is because natural morality, he calls it the knowledge of God. It's a way of understanding God's will. There are really two revelations. It's not just the written Torah, it's the Torah that is the revelation through the pious people. Kol Hamon Kekol Shaddai. The voice of the pious is the voice of God. Um, and this has nothing to do with apologetics or updating Jewish law or Jewish law evolving. No, it's about revealing what is latent there, but we can only see it now. Um, I understand that this is going to be controversial, and it's not going to be in line with how we've been taught growing up. But this is what Rav Kook says. Um, and the method of the Sanhedrin is through drashot. A drasha is you look at a pasuk and you explain it, what it means. There's a big dispute over what drashot are. Are drashot really, if you look at the Rishonim, a drasha is a creation for many of them, of a new halacha. Among the Achronim, many of them were troubled by this, and they assume that many of these laws were simply traditions, and a drasha is what we call an asmachta. It's just a peg, something to peg it to. But if you look at the Gemara, page after page, I don't see how you can get away, and this is what many people have pointed out, many authors, that it certainly seems that Chazal are creating new halachot through drashot, and uh, and therefore it's going to start up again. When we have a Sanhedrin again, it's going to start up again. Absolutely. Um, then I move into a different issue that he talks about. Actually, I can skip. I can skip this. He mentions something fast. Another fast. Everything Cook says is fascinating, but he says that uh, first of all, he talks about how particulars, all these pratim, little details, why they were necessary at a certain time. Maybe in the future they're no longer be necessary. If Cook says, by the way, that a lot of the chumras that came about during the diaspora, that was because of our time in the Golos. When we were a free people in the land of Israel, we won't need these chumras anymore. But we'll have new chumras appropriate to our place in the land of Israel. But he says that sometimes dross is mixed in with matters of holiness, prayer, and Torah, which cause loathing in the refined soul. What this means is that sometimes you will see Jewish texts, we're speaking about Jewish texts here, and you'll see things that together with holy stuff, you'll see dross, you'll see problems, you'll see ideas that are not correct. And what Rav Kook is speaking about, something I think most of us recognize, you can find all sorts of ideas in our Sfarim, which we would find very problematic, don't speak to us, even repulsive. I mean, I can show you Sfarim that advocate racism and all sorts of things. And Rav Kook says you shouldn't lose hope. You shouldn't let your spirits fall when you see this, because sometimes this happens. And don't assume that every great rabbi, every single thing he says is going to measure up to the highest moral values. Sometimes there'll be things that are not. He says Torah explanations can be found, and maybe some of them could have been appropriate in their day there, but they're not enduring. They're transitory. They're okay to explain it that way, but in our generation, explaining it in this way today would turn people off traditional Judaism. I mean, essentialist explanations between Jews, distinguishing Jews and non-Jews, or men and women. Those might have worked, let's say, in the 19th or the 18th century. They won't work today. And that's fine. Um, but Rav Kook says that the true tzaddik, when he senses this, he should try to raise up the dross, return it to purity. Tzaddikim have a way they try to, whether that means through explaining it in a different way or justifying it or saying it doesn't apply, whatever it is. He doesn't say about average person. It's very dangerous for the average person to, as it were, stand judge over Sfarim, things you see. The tzaddik, though, can. Of course, Rav Kook says this, but at the end of the day, if you read something and it troubles you, I don't know how you're not supposed to, but I don't know how far you could take it. Can you identify dross in the writings of the Rishonim, or even earlier? He doesn't. He doesn't. He doesn't say what. The only thing he says is that sometimes you'll have isolated Torah statements, which we're not bound. He says to every Torah statement by every figure. That's just the reality. You can't be. They contradict each other, and sometimes you will find passages that we're not proud of. But that's part of the system. The system is not perfect because the people are not perfect. And sometimes they'll come up with explanations, just like in halacha, they'll have explanations that are wrong. Great rabbis will have reached conclusions that are wrong in halacha. That's what tradition concludes they're wrong. And so too, great rabbis can come to hashkafic, philosophical ideas that the tradition will conclude are wrong. That
What is the Hebrew word he uses for dross?
Sig, I think it is. Um, I think that's what it is. Yes, Samech Yud Gimel, right? That's the word for dross, correct? Um, he uses that's the word he uses in Orot when he speaks of when that's the word he uses in Orot when he speaks of how you can't just have tzaddikim. You also need to have like just like the dregs of wine, at the bottom. You also need to have people who are not so pious in your community. They complete it. I don't know if he actually uses the word dross. That's my word. I think he speaks about. No, he actually no. He says dross. Sorry. I think it's probably that word samach yud gimel. That's how you say dross, right? Um, uh, uh, but then he deals with another matter, which is not theoretical, but even more practical. He says that we have a problem of Torah scholars who bring the Torah into disrepute because of their inappropriate behavior. Um, People see this and they're driven away by this. And again, the idea is not to assume that every individual, even if he's a great scholar, he doesn't own the Torah, and therefore, if he has a personal failing, this doesn't then destroy the Torah any more than incorrect ideas that he has. I mean, don't we know what Shakespeare says? Even the devil can quote scripture that for his purposes. Not comparing any rabbis, of course, to devils or anything, but it shows that we've had examples of people who've been shown to be charlatans, and they appear to be pious earlier on. So Torah stands above all of them. It can't be identified with any one individual. Okay, now let's return to the matter of decline of the generations. How could there be a decline of generations? We assume that from Sinai until today, sorry, not how can Rav Kook speak sorry about moving up, developing morality, if we know there's a decline of the generations? Rav Kook has an unusual approach to this. Rav Kook says, yes, the Torah sages have declined, no question about it. No one is going to compare our sages, even though they're great, to the Rambam or to the Shulchan Aruch. We know that there's been a decline. However, Rav Kook says, when it comes to the masses, it's not a decline. It's actually a raising up. And most people don't think about this. But it is true when you think, just look at our masses today. Our masses today, get through 12th grade Torah education, and then many of them go on to Israel, and many of them do Daf Yomi. You never had this before in the history of the Jewish people. Our masses are so way beyond in terms of knowledge of the previous generations. And Rav Kook says not just knowledge, he says also ethics, attention to certain matters. He's speaking his generation. It might have declined since Rav Kook's day because remember, the Jewish masses in Rav Kook day were living in a ghetto. Their whole environment was a Jewish environment. Then it starts to break down, obviously. But today, the masses we have, who knows whether the masses are influenced by, whether it's intuitive Jewish feeling or whether it's the latest TV show they watched. I mean, it's very hard today to speak of the Jewish masses the way Rav Kook did, that when was a self-contained group, when it was a Kal Kodesh, it's just on its own. But Rav Kook says that the masses go up and the scholars go down. Wow. Um, okay, so I want to now turn to developing morality, the idea that we as a people become more refined over time. That Rav Soloveitchik, that Rav Lichtenstein, I'm sure Rav Soloveitchik as well, would have had a lot of trouble with it. Rav Kook brings some examples of this. I mentioned one already, slavery. And this, to me, I mean, I don't see this really as very problematic. Uh, just like the Rambam says, sacrifices are given because the people are in a certain place. So too slavery is given because that was accepted, and it couldn't be abolished, so you make it better, and then but the idea is to move beyond it. And if you don't, maybe technically halacha, you could have a slave, but you're a novel b'shus Torah, you're a scoundrel. Or actually, thank you, Yehuda, for correcting me. Although the translation novel b'shus Torah is often translated as scoundrel with the b'shus Torah, Yehuda says today scoundrel has the connotation of a sort of like a trickster, a troublemaker. But it should be much stronger. So instead of saying scoundrel, he suggests degenerate, a degenerate with the Mishnah Torah. And I accept that to what you say, Yehuda. Rav Kook gives a couple examples. He talks about war. We know that there is a concept. Well, first of all, you have Milchemes Mitzvah, an obligatory war, a war fought to save the Jewish people. And then there is a halachic category. No one denies this. It's in the Gemara, it's in the Rambam, called a Milchemes Rishus, which is translated as a permissible war, a discretionary war. It's a recognized halacha concept, and the king, because he wants to extend his territory, now granted, he'll need the Urim V'Tumim will need approval from the Kohen Gadol that way, but still, the concept that you're going to have a permissible war because you want to expand your territory. That today does not strike us as moral. And in Rav Kook's halachic writings, he offers a couple of justifications for discretionary war. And by the way, it's not just a moral problem because of what you're doing to your neighbors. Jews are going to be killed in this battle. By what moral right can a king take the people to war? And every soul is so important to us. You see what's been going on the last couple of years, and you're just going to I mean, and the criticism of Netanyahu was he was extending the war for political reasons. That would be the worst crime imaginable because it's going to lead to death. So then, how can you even countenance such a concept of discretionary war? Well, we know in pre-modern times, pretty much all wars were discretionary wars. Wars were going on constantly. European kings. I wonder sometimes if the women were running the show, if things would be a little better. Someone said, all that Bina that someone mentioned before, but I don't know. There were places where queens were in charge, and they still had wars. It's like when you talk about how the moral advance of Jews over non-Jewish society, it is so clear. All the non-Jewish society the kings were doing were fighting, going out hunting and wasting time like that, except for some intellectuals. But as a government, they're just fighting wars back and forth and territory. Every one of these wars are discretionary wars. Well, because someone launches a discretionary war, the people who were attacked and defending themselves, I guess they'd be the parallel to Milchemes Mitzvah. But then they're launching their own discretionary wars later. And these today are regarded as completely inappropriate by everyone. So how to explain this? Sir Rav Kook says, in line with his conception that we've seen, and it appears only in one of the recently published works. He says, first of all, he says the idea of Mochemes Rishus, of a permissible war, discretionary war, is only suitable in a society that has not developed in a proper humane way and sees war as a way to achieve political goals. So the whole notion of Mochemes Rishus, which is recorded in the Gemara in detail and in the Rambam, this is a time-bound concept. When one, hopefully in Rav Kook's day, we've moved beyond it. But if we haven't, we will one day move beyond it, where there is no such conception. It was needed in a pre-modern era. It no longer is needed. Rav Kook says, however, we'll only get to that stage where you don't have this when the whole world reaches it, because you can't have a situation where one kingdom says that we'll never use war to achieve political objectives, while all other nations are prepared to do this. But we are coming to an era, a time when it's not going to be acceptable, and it is a concession to human weakness that this was allowed. This is not the way we're supposed to live. We're not supposed to have, and there's no chiyuv, obviously. There's no obligation to have discretionary war. That's the whole point. It's a rishus. So, just like there's no obligation to have slaves. Rav Kook makes a very interesting connection here. He say, by the way, he goes in detail, discusses Mechames Rishus, Mechames Mitzvah. He points out that in a Mechames Mitzvah, even Levim are obligated to participate. People forget that. Oh, um, I mean, the Levim have to go out. Everyone has to go out, and Milchemes Mitzvah is a mitzvah to save the Jewish people. So I don't even understand how it could be a question as to whether people should fight or not. But Rav Kook compares the discretionary war to that of the Yafat Toar. Yafat Toar, the beautiful woman who's taken by a soldier during war. I already mentioned that the sages already say that this is a concession to human weakness. It doesn't represent an ideal moral standard. We shouldn't move beyond it. Rav Kook compares it to the Ifat Torah, that the Torah gave certain laws that we are designed to move beyond them. Again, it sounds radical, sounds reform, move beyond the law. But Chazal already said this about the Yafat Torah. Yafat Torah is not something anyone should do. It would be better if that wasn't the phenomenon. But it's just given because of the Yetzer Hara. Um, and Rav Kook compares obviously to slavery and as well to discretionary war. Let me read you what Rav Kook says about this in one of the newly published writings. Anyone can easily understand that it is only with regard to a nation or individuals among them who have not received a complete humane education that there is a need to counter the evil inclination by permitting a Yafat Toar. From this we learn that just as we are supposed to rise above the law of Yafat Toar, so we should merit to rise above the need for education about Mechemet Reshut, and we should recognize that all weapons are shameful. That's where we're heading. In the Messianic era, there aren't going to be any wars. There aren't going to be permissible wars. And so we want to move in that direction. This is very similar. He doesn't know Rav Kook, but Rav Nachum Eliezer Rabinovich, Rosh Yeshiva Ma'ale Adumim, he has an essay in which he explains the Torah's toleration for polygamy, slavery, war, as really as a tolerance, because he says these are at odds with basic Torah values. He says the Torah did not require that the principles, behind these things be applied in full from the outset. It taught society to advance step by step. Polygamy, I guess polygamy would go there. At first, I was going to say, well, what polygamy served an important role in a society where all these men were being killed in wars. So the women, they didn't have careers. If they were not married, they had no way of surviving. But really, when you think about it, polygamy is at odds with really the profound Jewish value of marriage. If you look in the entire Talmud, Bavli and Yerushalmi, you will not find one example not that I've learned all of Bavli and Yerushalmi, but I've read people who have learned who've said this. So if you know of one example, correct me. But apparently, there's not one example of a Tana or a Mora who's indicated there as having more than one wife. Maybe there is. Certainly, maybe these people who've said this have overlooked one, but none of the big ones. And if you look at the ideal of a Jewish marriage, be it in Mishlei or the stories we have about marriages, Rabbi Akiva, etc., the idea is one man, one woman, and everything we speak about marriage. Anytime anyone's under the chuppah, there's no notion here that there's a second wife or a third wife. It's all about making a bayis ne'eman b'Yisrael. So yes, in certain societies it was necessary. So it's allowed. And then Rabbeinu Gershom bans it. And the Sephardic world, though technically it wasn't banned, but they didn't do it. They don't do it anymore in that society either. So I would agree with Rabbi Rabinovich. Why what Rav Kook says is so important is that his perspective allows you to affirm that the Torah at times is presenting not the ceiling, but the floor, to use Rabbi Soloveitchik's word. Rabbi Soloveitchik said about Jewish law that Jewish law is the floor, not the ceiling. Yes, you have to follow Jewish law. Everyone does. But it's not only Jewish law. That's the baseline. But if all you do is follow Jewish law, you could be, as Nachmanides said, a degenerate with the permission of the Torah. There are some examples that, and we've spoken of a couple of them, where Rav Kook allows you to affirm that the Torah presents a more primitive morality that, while permissible in the past, is not appropriate in contemporary times or in the future Messianic era. Rav Lichtenstein, as we saw, is I'm not satisfied with how he formulates it. Just that because I don't I would love to say to him, it's not a question of judging previous generations. It's saying that this is how the divine providence works. That humanity has developed in a certain way. I think there's a broad consensus in the Torah community, and I don't just mean in the more modern open community, even in the Haredi world, that when you think about a future, a better future, a messianic future, I can't imagine anyone has in mind a return to practices like Yifat Toar and Mechemes Reshus and slavery. I mean, the whole direction of our existence over the centuries is moving us into higher levels of morality. Um, Again, Rav Kook would disagree with that, but for Rav Kook, higher levels of morality and kedusha, and removing ourselves even from things that are technically permissible. For Rav Kook, we're moving in a direction even where we won't shed any blood. We'll get to this soon, even blood of animals. Um, Another example Rav Kook mentions Amalek. By the way, before I leave slavery, I want to tell you, though, that I deal with this in a footnote. Rav Kook has a letter in which he presents a whole different view of slavery. What I shared with you is the view that I think modern people will find very attractive, but he has a letter in which it doesn't contradict what I said, because he still, even in this letter, would assume that we will reach a time when we don't want to do this anymore. But he says that, at least in that, before we get to that era, he says that certain people, nations, are, this is almost like what Aristotle says, that they are condemned to slavery, that that's their place in the world, and that it's actually that's their place. It's very troubling to read this from where we are in 2025, but he's obviously 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, in a different era, and he sees slavery as an advantage to certain nations that need to be brought up themselves to a higher level of morality. That's the sort of thing you say today, you'll get canceled. But and it makes for uncomfortable reading, but it's not actually in contradiction to what he says later, because he's even there. He acknowledges that we're moving in the direction where we will emancipate ourselves, to use the harkening back to Abraham Lincoln, emancipate ourselves from this idea. And then that leads him to the discussion of Amalek. Amalek, of course, is we say Ashkenazic word Amalek. There's a video online where Vavad Yosef is making fun of the Ashkenazim, and he says Amalek, Amalek. Say it's Amalek. And yes, if you're when you read the Torah, you have to pronounce it Amalek. But this obviously is a law that troubles modern people. Rav Kook has an easy solution for this um, that preserves the law while making it no longer relevant. He states that when humanity arises at the point where they will no longer have any need for hatred, that is, we will. Hum- this is called meliorism. People are getting better. Humanity is reaching to a higher level. Um, there will no longer be any need for hatred. We can be certain that Amalek will no longer be in existence. That is, this idea of Amalek, a nation to hate, is when society, when the Jewish society needs an outlet for hatred. But the commandment is only applicable in a time when hatred has a place. But we're moving, I don't know if we've gotten there yet, but we're moving in the direction where we will be at a stage where there's no room for hatred, any hatred. And by the way, he also says, in case that doesn't solve the problem for people, he says that the whole commandment about Amalek is not what people think, that it's a commandment for individuals. No, it was a commandment for the nation during wartime. It's not like any individual could go up to a person and kill him saying, "You're from Amalek." I mean, it doesn't work like that. That's not what it's about. Although, I mean, I still remember in yeshiva all the questions like, let's say you knew that this person was from Amalek. That Rav Kook says this is talking about during Mechemes Mitzvah. Amalek, by the way, can convert to Judaism, according to the Rambam. Absolutely. Can we talk about other Torah laws that will cease to be applicable, or is this getting us into Reform Judaism? I gave one example because of what Shadal says that I suggested might be one of these. Because after all, since Rav Kook says what he says, I don't feel it's moving into heresy to suggest I'm not getting rid of it. I'm saying that this is a thing that I can imagine the Sanhedrin would declare no longer binding. It was only for a different sort of society. And the example I gave was the Are Miklat, because Shadal already says that this is a concession of the Torah to the culture of the day. It's hard to imagine that, even though I grant the Rambam says that Are Miklat, the cities of refuge, will be returned in a future messianic era, but it's hard to imagine where we are today. And as far as I know, there were never Are Miklat in Bayit Sheni. But it's hard to imagine a situation where you kill someone and then you have to run to the air miklat, or you'd be killed. And if you leave it, I mean, our societies don't function this way. We have courts, we judge people, we do this and that. So uh, it's just hard to see that this is something that the Sanhedrin will declare as that we would actually have a society where private citizens are given the right, if they hear that so and so has left the city of refuge to go visit his elderly mother, that then you can go pick up your gun and go shoot him. I mean, this isn't the society that we want, and this is what Rav Kook was speaking about, that certain things are at a different level. That we're not going to want violence at all. Rav Henkin says that the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash has, I mentioned this, had a positive thing in that you can no longer execute people because that's the direction we're moving. We want to move in that direction. I There was a rabbi named Ronan Neuwirth. He was the rabbi in Ranana of the big shul there, Oel Ari. He was a leader of the young religious Zionist rabbis. And he wrote a lot, definitely on the left of Israeli Orthodoxy. I met him one time because he wrote this book in Hebrew and then he wrote it in English. And it was then published on basically how it's called the Narrow Halachic Bridge, deals with all sorts of moral issues and Jewish law. He came to my house March of 2020. He had been on a sabbatical. The show gave him not a year, a series of months. He was living in Teaneck. We discussed the book, and then we were continue. He got on the plane. It was one of the last planes before they shut everything down, I think, other than El Al. And then lo and behold, about I think I don't know how much longer than that. I didn't even know. I didn't find out till months later. I'm looking it up now on my computer. Yeah, I'll pull it up for you actually here. That a huge, huge loss. He died. He dropped dead. It was about a year after I was with him at the age of 50. He was head of the Beit Hillel organization. Uh, I only found out about that months after he passed away. So it was a huge loss and obviously a shock. I see here, actually, right underneath, he was at Torah in Motion. I didn't know that. See, I plugged in his name, and the second thing here is his that he was at Torah in Motion. So, so why am I mentioning this? Because in his book, he says I'll just read you the passage, and then we'll deal with Rav Kook and sacrifices. But he says, following Rabbi Kook, I too fully believe that when we merit the rebuilding of the third temple, just as animal sacrifices will no longer be offered, we'll get into sacrifices. And does Rav Kook say this? What he quotes him as saying? Okay, but that's not why I'm quoting it now. He says when we merit the rebuilding of the third temple, the mitzvah of sota, which is very hard for our moral sensibilities to accept, will also no longer be practiced. As they did in the past, the rabbis will find a way not to actualize this mitzvah. It will remain eternally theoretical along the lines of study it and receive a reward. He is absolutely correct that he is following the path of Rav Kook. Rav Kook could have said something like that. He never said that about Sota. This is Rabbi Neuwirth. Now, if you're going to say, well, again, we're moving into Reform Judaism here, the problem is that Rav Kook has opened the door. Rav Kook has said that certain mitzvot were time bound in terms of practice. So yes, so we'll study them. And like Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, we'll talk all about the rules of an Evet, but we're not going to institute it anymore. And Rav Kook never says that it's just the three things I mentioned, Amalek and or the permissible war and slavery, Yafat Toar, those things. So Rav Kook really opened the door when I was in England and I was speaking on the book and I'm sharing some of these ideas. A Rosh Hashiva there from the Hasidic world. He came with his shtreimel and his white stocking. It was Motzei Shabbos. And some of you listening from England, you remember the scene because he said that he came afterwards and he, in front of everyone, and says now he knows why the Frum, he's talking about his community, had a problem with some of Rav Kook said that because we get it, but that's the how far do you take this? Is Rabbi Norworth going too far here? I mean, is the Sota ritual, does that really go against our moral sensibilities? I'm not sure it does. I never thought of that. I quote him. I said that my own contribution to this was the cities of refuge because I don't see how that works in a modern sort of society. Sota, to be a sota is like a terrible, terrible sin, and I never would have occurred to me to think that way. But once the door is open, then everyone can come, and you see how dangerous this is. Everyone can then start thinking, okay, well, which mitzvah are we going to say is not going to apply in practice? And then before you know it, the whole Torah has been pushed aside. So it's a maybe that's why they didn't publish these writings because with Yehuda and others, it opens up a can of worms. And maybe we should just say that, Rav Kook can say this, and for the rest of us, we just will wait. When the future comes, then we'll see what's going to happen. Because once other people start speculating, and I never would have speculated had Shadal himself, not that he's a posek or anything, but he's certainly a great Torah commentator. Had he not said that cities of refuge were a concession to the time, I never would have mentioned that either. But since he mentioned it, I can put it into Rav Kook's framework. But I think you can see now this is one of the most radical things. Um, and I didn't say I said many people would say cities of refuge. I didn't even personally say it myself, although I think I'd be inclined to this. But you can see already how this is maybe one of the most radical things Rav Kook says. Not so much for what he says, but that he opens the door that now it's a possibility of saying that all sorts of mitzvot, maybe Shemitah is not going to be applicable anymore because it's too difficult and this and that. I mean, you can go down the list. Maybe you're going to say that there's no issue of Aguna anymore and the Sanhedrin has to find a solution. So this is, I actually think this is more controversial if people understood what Rav Kook is saying. that this is more controversial than everything we've set up till now because it deals with the halachic system. That's the essence of Judaism. Other things we've seen about natural morality, this and that, that's theorizing, and but this is actual Jewish law, and that's the essence. That's like at the center of our life. So I think this is the most radical. I don't think others would agree. I think many people just read through the chapter and say, "Oh, that's interesting." But from my perspective, this is the most subversive and provocative thing I think we've seen until now, and we have more to say about it because we're going to deal with sacrifices and animal sacrifices. After all, if the future, if our hope is for a vegetarian society because humanity will not be able to shed any blood, then what about the mitzvah in the Torah to have animal sacrifices? And we will get to that. So next class we will finish up this chapter, natural Jewish morality and halacha, and maybe we'll even start the next chapter. This we are in chapter 6 now, and there are 9 chapters. So let me take the questions and comments here. iPad says about, yes, you said Rabbi Berkovitz, Eliezer Berkovitz. Actually, his name is spelled with a V, V-I-T-S. He deals with Torah tolerated values versus Torah mandated values. Exactly. Rabbi Berkovitz says the exact same thing that Rabbi Rabinovich says. I did classes in Torah in Motion, Rabbi Eliezer Berkovitz, and he also was radical and in some of his ideas and how he understood the Hawk system. But I don't think what he says about Torah tolerated versus Torah mandated is at all radical. I mean, I think that's pretty mainstream. Um, and then you say regarding ethical values and Torah as a four ceiling, I believe Rabbi Kelman is a story about Rabbi Feinstein, rabbinic students, and an extra shaver. I don't know that story. If Rabbi Kelman knows what you're referring to,
I
he'll
did. I
say.
put it down. I put it down
Oh, you
in
put it down.
right
Okay, I'll read it for
below.
everyone. Look, I already told you the story about the Rosh Hashiva, the Rav of Gateshead, where he said to me, I asked him, could I have one of the yeshiva students buy the sefer from the Svarim store with a discount, and then I buy from the discount. And he said, halacha, absolutely, it's okay. He makes a kinyan, and you make a kinyan, but it's not moral. It's not ethical. So, yes, that would be, if I did that, I'd be on the floor. But we're supposed to, the whole idea of Kadoshim TU is we're supposed to move beyond the floor. You can be an unethical person and follow Jewish law in its particulars. I think everyone has to accept that concept. It's explicit in Nachmanides. Herb says the proof of natural morality is from Midian. What? Why punish for not providing food? Not one of the 7 mitzvot. Answer Musar TV. Yes, I mentioned that from last class. From Rabbi Amital gives that as an example. Perfect. That's what Rav Amital says. iPad says in hockey, it said it's easier to teach a goal scorer to back check than a back checker to score. So it's easier to teach or make a mensch into a Torah scholar and a Torah scholar to a mensch. Beautifully, beautifully said. And that's really what Derech Eretz Kadmol Torah means, according to Rav Kook. The story with the shaver is with Rabbi Riskin, who interviewed 12 people, men, this was the 70s, for principal of his new high school, and asked what would they do if they ordered a shaver from a catalog. Oh, and what did it say? I can't read it here. My thing's being blocked here. Um, if
To
they order a share from
arrive.
the catalog and what arrived and two
Two.
arrived?
Two
Two. Okay.
shavers
This
arrived.
thing is blocking me, this thing on the side. 11 said it's Talot Akum and a mistake of the Najin need no turn. Only one person said they would give it back. That's would be hard. Yes. Okay. Yes, you've told that story before. Abba, it's called Bina Yasera. We're very proud of having it. Correct. Women's intuition is a real thing. Wherever Mazuz says it's a real thing, and it's very fascinating what he says it, but in context, you wouldn't be too crazy about it because it's sort of like a consolation prize. It's like he says the women, they're not learning Gemara, so therefore they're given the Bina Yasera. But the best thing is to have the Gemara, but true, the men are lacking something. He does say that the men they have the Gemara. That's more important, but they're also lacking something very important, which the women can give to them, which is similar to Rav Kook saying, yes, obviously the Torah scholars have a very important thing, but they're lacking something very important as well. Um, Rabbi Kelman says, Rochelle said the same thing. Rabbis are less learned, but rabbis are much more learned. Yes, that's you never really think about it, but it's so true that generations have declined. But look at Dafyomi. Look at attention to aspects of Jewish law among the masses that no one even heard of years ago. While yes, we can speak about the decline of Torah scholars, no one, I mean, we don't have people like they had 100 years ago, or even Moshe, Rav Soloveitchik, etc. If you look at the average person is on a much higher level than if we remember from our grandparents' time. Joseph says the
I
Talmud says Menashe appeared to a sage in a dream and told him that the latter only finds it easy to not worship idols because he exists in a later time. Maybe we just find it easier to recognize our moral intuitions. Well, that's it's obvious from Rav Kook's perspective. If you took anyone, and obviously one of the great sages from an earlier era, and put him in our era, he would feel what we're feeling, but it's just that we stand on the shoulders of generations and generations, and God only wanted it to be revealed in this era. The certain moral feelings we have would have been inappropriate in a prior era. In fact, Rav Kook says to anticipate, a lot of people think Rav Kook's a vegetarian. He's not a vegetarian. We'll get to this. He opposes vegetarianism, and the reason is because we're not yet ready for vegetarianism. There will be a future era that's ready for vegetarian. For us today to be vegetarians is a problem. So everything in its proper time and place. Some go on boar hunts, others golf.
I'd
So yes,
like
Nikki.
to object to the concept that maybe we're more higher morally now than we were before. Growing up in the 1940s and before, a Jew was a Jew. Some kept more mitzvahs, some kept less mitzvahs, but that and every Jew was considered a Jew. Now we're sliced into yeshivish and Haredi and a little. If you wear the wrong clothes, you're not that part. I'm not so sure we're so.
Okay, in that sense, you're right. We've lost touch with the primal feeling of what it means to be a Jew. There's no question. But if you speak in terms of ethical sensitivity, I'll give you an example. When you were growing up, if someone was thought to be, let's say, gay, um, people would mock him. They would think of him as some sort of barbarian, this and that. Today, we think very differently, and we don't think that we think we're doing the ethical thing that we understand. It's we relate very differently. Um, so are we going to say that we're better than the previous generation from the 40s? Let's say no, but wouldn't you acknowledge that we have a certain ethical sensitivity and we believe that this is a correct ethical sensitivity, how to relate to people, even though we acknowledge that 50 years ago, our grandparents would have related very differently. They were not sensitive to things that we are sensitive to. So Rav Kook sees this as providence advancing, together with the points you mentioned of all these things that create problems. But in these ethical matters, there's a sensitivity. Now it can go overboard, and you can be so sensitive that all of a sudden you can become the most anti-Israel person because you're sensitive to human rights, and we would say that's a distortion. But I don't know. I mean, the example I gave, I think, Nikki, is a very good example of how we are sensitive, and we think the Torah teaches us this sensitivity, and yet we would acknowledge that the great rabbis from the 1940s would never in a million years have that sensitivity. So what does that mean? Does that mean we're better than them? No. Um, it's tricky, but I think everyone has to acknowledge what I said is correct, that we relate to certain things differently. Ramosha Feinstein, no one's greater than Ramosha Feinstein, the greatest sage. Uh, I mean, we've spoken about him so many times. When he has a responsum dealing with homosexuality, and he doesn't understand it at all. He sees it just he's writing to someone who's gay and saying, obviously, this isn't a taiva, it's not a yetzer hara. This is what you do. People who want to rebel against God. No one actually has such a feeling. Now, in the Haredi world today, they're embarrassed by this. They won't mention this. They won't spread it around. This is not their approach. Or Aaron Feldman has a whole essay on this topic. He doesn't go near that because we recognize today it's not true. It's not true scientifically. It's not true what we know person to person. It's not true. It's not even true ethically Does that mean Ramosha was not ethical? Of course not. But it's a different era. You can go back to the 19th century. I hate to say it. There was a synagogue, though, you know it well, Nikki, B'nai Jeshurun, but in those days it was an Orthodox synagogue. Has grown up in Manhattan. No, it wasn't Orthodox when you were there, but it was an Orthodox synagogue in the 19th century. And the rabbi in the 19th century was name was Morris Raphael, leading Orthodox rabbi in America. And he wrote, he had delivered a sermon talking about how slavery is a Torah value, and not like the Reform were saying that, abolition. And this sermon was reprinted all over the South. Now, true, he said that when you have to treat your slave nicely, but he said, I mean, today we're embarrassed by this, and it's unfortunate that it was an Orthodox rabbi who gave that sermon. And so I think if you take the long view, you really have to come to some sort of understanding, like Rav Kook, that Torah leads us to certain ethical advances. I don't see otherwise how you can make sense unless we want to revert to this closed-minded view that say the only reason you have a problem with slavery is because you're influenced by Western values, that there's nothing wrong with slavery. The Torah says it. I don't think any of us want to go there. That because we have an intuition, and this is from God. So that's what I would say. And but it's tricky. And what you say is, unfortunately, the you're reflecting what it meant to be a Jew as a Jew, just a Jew. And
That's what
now the Sephardim still have that. I spoke for a Sephardic group last night, although there's a lot of Ashkenazim there. Denominations have destroyed what it meant. I mean, in Eastern Europe, that's what we say. We daven with the sinners. There was one shul. The sinners went there. Every Jew was a Jew. And these denominations have really but that's as best as I can explain it. Now, Ruth, the whole SOTA procedure is precipitated by a jealous husband. It's easy to see how it can be sidelined by judicial intervention by the judges, Kohanim, to prevail upon husband against therapy. 100%. It could, and that's what he's referring to. But the idea that you would never have such a thing, that by definition it's immoral, it never struck. I never looked at it, maybe because I'm not a woman. I never looked at that as a moral thing. Rabbi Rachman has a whole piece that it's really it's like a psychological test, not but it didn't that when I thought of something moral, immoral, that really a concession to weakness, that didn't come to mind, but I could see it. Okay, I thank you all. Thank you
Dr.
very
Mark,
much, Nikki.
I don't
Nikki,
know.
by the way, I saw your picture in the Jewish Link this week, so Mazel Tov on that, and thank you all for coming out tonight, Rabbi Kelman.
Yeah, I don't know if you wanted to comment. I think you missed the one comment on Rav Kook and the reestablishment of the Sanhedrin. I don't know if
Oh,
you want.
here it is. Joseph says, does Rav Kook assess how to reestablish this, just how to reestablish that? Yes, we will get to this Sanhedrin next class.
who was
The-
it who said Yehi Adam? Was that Rav Amital or Rav
No,
Kook?
Rav Amital said that in Eastern Europe, when he's growing up, this was an expression.
So it's
Lo
Rav
Adam
Amital.
Yirei Shamayim. That is, Lo Adam. First, you have to be a mensch, and then you be a Yirei Shamayim. That's one of these expressions that were common in Eastern Europe. You, the sort of thing that Nikki is referring to, that Jews grew up with an understanding. Rav Amital is a great story. It's told by a number, and it's mentioned here as well. When Rav Amital's son was bar mitzvah, Rav Amital married the granddaughter of Rizal Zalman Meltzer. So at the bar mitzvah, you had all these big rabbis there, and they all had their 2 cents. They gave their dvar Torah. We wish the bar mitzvah boy that he should grow up to be like his great grandfather. He's a yichus of Torah. That's what it all was. Grow up to be a great Talmud Chacham. And that's that. Rav Amital gets up and says, you know something? My father was not a Talmud Chacham, but he was an Erlich Yid. And my blessing to you, my son, is that you should be an Erlich Yid. Then later, if you want to be a Talmud Chacham, be a Talmud Chacham. But I want you to be an Erlich Yid. So it's so Rav Hamital, moving it into Klal Yisrael, Amcha, as we say, away from this intellectual elitism that is found in the yeshiva world. And Rav Amital, just like the story I told tonight, Rav Amital is impressed with the man who so has the religious feeling he wants to go on the Temple Mount, the Talmud Chacham's like, what are you talking about? It's a machlokas. That man no longer desires to go on Temple Mount. He's lost the emotion because he substituted intellectualism. And I'll end with one thing. Remember Chaim Soloveitchik's famous article, Rupture and Reconstruction. He talks about how the primacy, the connection that he felt, that he saw, actually, not that he felt, that he saw growing up in Boston among the simple Jews from Eastern Europe, that was replaced by the books. And that the sense of God really upon you was now there's an intermediary. It's through the books, and that's what Chaim is speaking about. He says the yoke. He says the yoke of the law has replaced the yoke of God's presence, or something like that. And look, we can't go back. We can't undo what we've done. We can't go back to a simple time. We can't become these creatures of Rousseau, living, in the wild, connected to nature. We can't. But we should recognize what we've lost with all our sophistication and all our advances. We've lost this primal, natural connection to Torah, to the Jewish people, and we've substituted intellectual connection. We have no choice, but we've lost something along the way. And with that, Rabbi Kelman, and thank you, Janine, we will end for tonight.
Yes, okay. I couldn't agree with you more. Yes, we have lots. And I think it is connected, unfortunately, to the extra learning of the Balabatim. As people learn more, they become more, looking down on other people. I think the two are connected. The
They
growth of
are they are
Sonia.
connected, and we have to find a middle ground for this.
Right.
A middle. It's Rav Sheilat in his critique of the Haredi world. He suggested you have to learn Emunah, and you have to have a broader curriculum, Tanakh. Talmud study might be more susceptible to that, but maybe not. We know that Torah in Motion does a very good job in those areas of study. Yeah.
Part of the
That's right.
problem, I think, is also, I spoke to Chaim about his article, the fact that we are the first generation that didn't have grandparents.
Mhm.
And that's why it went to the book.
That's his theory. Also the uprooting but really, what's the alternative? We're happy that our grandchildren are educated, and I'm
Exactly.
happy that my children are more pious than I am. I mean, and more educated at their age. That's what we want. And they ask me, what do I mean? My kids are more pious than me. I'll tell you, I'm not embarrassed to say it. Get home 9:30 at night on a Sunday night. I'm exhausted. I'm at home. I'll do my Riv at home by myself. What do my sons do? They take the car. They go to the 10 o'clock minyan, on the other side of town. And I'm proud of that. I'm, Cain Yearbo, but the generations are supposed to be like that. And they're learning much better than I did at their age. But you have to be careful. I mean, it comes, you lose something as well. Uh,
Okay.
okay.
Yes, yes, important stuff here. Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay, look to see you next week, tomorrow morning, of course, Dr. Sokolow at 10 o'clock. Piyut and the Parsha, every week, if you haven't come yet, he takes a Piyut, which we've lost the whole art of Piyut, and on the Parsha of Shavua. And then, of course, Rabbi Shulman will be 1 o'clock, his ongoing shiur on Sefer Yeshua, and then all the regular shiurim during the week. Okay, look forward to learning with you. Please invite a friend, and we'll to be continued next week. And I'll recommend again. I think I told you, Mark, I'm reading the book for the second time, and what I have to look up some of the footnotes, some of the sources, like your Sfaring blog articles that you refer to, where you develop some of these things. It really is the book itself is a fascinating reading. It's always good to hear. The
Thank
oral
you.
discussion, is much different, or
Yes.
than in the book. But it's if you haven't read the book yet, I highly recommend it. The book on Rav
Thank
Kook.
you
I
all.
didn't know you were up for this award. That I didn't know until you said at the beginning. But okay, and all right, Lila, to everybody,
Right.
and I can go back and enjoy the snow. Okay, here. Janine, you're missing the snow in Toronto. That's what happened. You moved to New York. You gave up on the beautiful snow here. Okay. In the Upper West Side, how much snow do you get? All right. Lie the tov, everybody.